We're going to show the installation of a PTG inflation system, an airbox implement system on a DB66 planter. You want to start by mounting your control box and your monitors in place. This is one instance of where we mounted a monitor in the cab on a tractor. The second box, which transfers the PTG electric signals and powers the system, we mounted here on a precision planting air compressor that they're supplying air to the system with. This is mounted right on the end of the compressor housing. You're on the power coming from the monitor in the cab comes to the back port here on this box, plugs right in, so you want to have the distance right for enough length on the cable. Your power wire that feeds the whole system is this front position here, and we hooked it on the supply. We pulled off the precision planting and just plugged it into their electric connection here. The wires are not marked as such as positive and negative, but one wire has a number 1 printed on it, and that's positive. The number 2 wire is negative. This planter, we decided to mount the air control box that takes your pilot lines from the front box to the back. We mount it here in between the seed tanks, and this is also where your wheel air lines come to. Can be mounted in other locations, but we did it here just for convenience. This installation on the DB66 planter, this farm mounted conduits on the side of their frame to run electric, air, and other fertilizer lines through. So this was the most logical place to run. And what you want to do is lay out your flexible conduit here on the roughly through the other conduit and up, and lay it along where you think you may run it to the back. And then continuing on, mounted in places where it's not going to be pinched, we'll run on up across under the seed tank to a spot, and just roughly get the distance you're going to need to go up underneath the second box. Next step is to take that piece of conduit here, lay it out on the floor. You're going to take the small 4mm yellow, blue, red, and black air lines. Use a fish tape. You're going to pull these through your conduit, your plastic conduit here, laid out on the floor with a fish tape, and you want to leave about 6 inches here at the front section. At the back, where it exits up at the other box, you want to leave roughly about 18 inches on each of those colors, with the exception of yellow. You want to leave about 12 foot long. Once that's done, tape all your ends together so they don't slide out. Finish running your plastic conduit along your frame, tie it all down, and run your ends up underneath the platform to your second box. Then you can also hook up, and these are all color coded, these push connect fittings. Blue goes to blue, black to black, yellow to yellow, and red to red. In this instance, we were supplying air with the 2020 precision compressor. So we pulled an adapter fitting off the end of the tank to a 1/2 inch truck air brake line in this case. We ran it also through the same conduit going through the frame, and then it also runs right alongside our plastic loom and ends up at that second box also, leave about 2 foot extra up there at that end. Alright, up here at the second box, we're showing in between the seed tanks, we show where our plastic conduit comes up through a hole in the platform. We have our blue, our black, and our red, and our yellow. Go ahead and trim off the blue, black, red, and just those colors. Insert them into the corresponding push connect fittings on the end of the control box here. The yellow will fish back down, and it ends up going to a wheel, so we don't want to do anything to it quite yet. Next step for this installation is to build a support for your airlines. In this case we used 3 by 3 by 1/4 inch angle iron on a DB66 planer. We ended up 46.5 inches long, and this farm is in quite a bit of mud, so they opted to put a kicker in place also. They used 3/4 inch round rod, 37 inches long, to help stabilize it. It's welded in place at the wheel frame in the center, and that supports the airlines. Here's a view of the right hand side, and it's identical to the left hand side. Next step is to drill a hole through your rims for the airline to run from the inside tire to the outside tire. Start out in between, roughly opposite of your valve stems, and they're not always in the same place inside to outside, but in between a pair of lug bolt holes here. Go roughly halfway in between, halfway between the inner surface here and the outer surface. Start with a pilot hole and work your way up to 3/4 inch diameter, enough to fit the airlines through. And this will go through all 4 wheels. It's very helpful when you get up to the larger sizes to drill through, to use some bits called a hole hog. They're available from McMaster Car and some other companies that can go directly from 1/2 inch diameter, 3/4 diameter. They have 4 flutes on them, and they don't grab as bad and draw quite as much blood. When you're all done with your holes, you want to chamfer your edges with a slightly larger bit to get rid of the sharp edges. Touch them up with some yellow paint so they don't rust. Here's a view of the inside wheel, inside between the wheels, showing the hole entering and where the airlines are going to run through. And here's a view of the inboard side of an inboard wheel with a speed sensor, showing where the hole comes through in between the speed sensor flanges. We also need to say that the holes in your inboard and outboard wheels need to line up with each other. It's also very helpful to use a jack, have the side jacked up so you can spin it and put it in a better position for drilling from the inside. It makes it a lot easier to push the holes through. Next step is drill a hole in the rim for your wheel check valves. Start out with a small pilot hole, and it's best, the theory here is to have the check valve leading the normal direction of rotating, and the hose is trailing away from it if you get in the mud. So we start in a spot here on the rim, roughly halfway on the flat, and in between wheel lug bolt holes, so you can still get an impact wrench on those lugs if you need to. Start out at a small pilot hole and work up to a 19/32 drill bit. It needs to be pay close attention to vertical this way and also vertical in and out, so that the hole, when it gets threaded, is square. Once your hole is made, and you don't have to deflate the tire to do it, but you need to wear eye protection and ear protection because it's going to be loud when you ventilate the tire, and it'll help blow the chips out, but a few chips that fall in don't hurt. Once you're done, then you take your tap, your 3/8 British pipe thread tap, and a square socket and a ratchet, and you thread that hole as square as possible as you can, again, so that check valve threads in squarely and seals better. Be very careful when you're threading the hole. You thread only in far enough that the check valve seal threads in tight before it bottoms out on the shoulder. Use Loctite or a thread sealer to help seal the threads. Once that's done, you can reinflate the tires by hand and use soapy water to check for leaks at those thread fittings. Next step is to bend yourself some conduit to protect the airlines running between the wheels. We used 3/4 EMT conduit here, and we made a bend to go over the center sections. 36 inches long, and do not bolt them down at this time, but have them ready to start running airlines through. Go ahead and fish your 12mm airline and a small 4mm airline through your hole towards your inside wheel. It'll then go through through your conduit, going in between the wheels. Here's a better view of the airlines going between the wheels through the conduit. Leave your conduit still loose this time until you're fished clear through to the inside. These check valves are normally loose between here and here. So you can go ahead and when you spin these in and seal them up, when you're all done, you can rotate this banjo portion around and aim the push connect fitting toward your hole in the center. When you get done with that, 3/4 inch wrench here, 13/16 wrench here, and snug that up. It doesn't have to be killer tight. There are O-ring fittings at both positions. When you're all done with that, go ahead and connect your air lines, the small one to the small hole and the large one to the large hole. Make sure your ends are square cut and fully inserted as far as they'll go. Here's a view of the speed sensor side, and we put a zip tie to hold the two lines together for more clearance. Also here, your speed sensor wire, we need to drill a hole through your axle frame and put a zip tie to hold it down so it doesn't get tangled up. Here we're showing the conduits that run the air lines to the left side and then the right side. And here we show where the conduit runs roughly 18 inches in from the outboard end of the angle iron. Well, it begins there, tied down to your kicker if you have, or the angle iron itself. In this case, because of the transport wheel axle assembly rotating up, we ran the conduit unsupported here because of movement up to the center and over the other. Here's where the airline from the left hand side comes across and the conduit ends. Get that measured out, then you can lay your airline on the floor, the conduit on the floor, run your 12 and your 4mm blue airlines through it on the floor with straight, and pull probably 8 feet extra airline through that conduit when you're all said and done. Here's where the conduits we strap down from the left hand side. We run larger zip ties to help support it. We run the blue, large blue and the small blue up and under to the second box under the platform between the seed tanks. The similar thing will happen with the right hand side. We're going to measure out conduit to be tied down to get your length correct. Comes up and ends right beside the left hand side. Take back down on the floor, string your 12 and your 4mm blue through it. Go ahead and mount it up so that the blue and the big blue and the small blue go up through the platform to your second box. On the left hand side, you'll remember we have the yellow airline that was left hanging down through. This needs to be strung back through the same conduit going to the left beside the large blue and the small blue, but going back the opposite direction toward the outboard side. Here we're showing the blue airlines, both small blue and big blue, for both the left and the right hand sides, coming up through a hole in the floor. We loop these around the boxes and they attach to the elbow fittings on each side of the box. Doesn't make any difference which way, but we did the loops to keep the angle going into the push connect fittings as square as possible. Here we're showing the small blue lines where they connect to the top of the second box. They are both connected from the wheels up to this point. Doesn't make any difference which one gets connected where. When you're all done, tie down your air lines neatly and push your extra back towards the wheels, and it'll be fished back towards the through the conduits out to the wheels where your extra is out there. Then all the air lines can get tied down to your frame along the way. Here we're showing the dummy couplings mounted on top. This is an extra coupling where if you get in extremely muddy conditions you can tie the hoses back so they're not hooked to the wheels. Then also the aluminum telescoping tubing gets mounted on the end of your angle iron to run the air hoses through. We ended this approximately even with the edge of the tire, and then the elbow fitting sticks out past roughly an inch past the side of the tire. Your air lines, which will run through the conduit, the blue needs to stay long, the small blue needs to stay long. There will be a coupling here with a pressure sense fitting on it, and that's where your yellow hook's on. Try and show a little better view of this. But that can be mounted right here along your angle iron and tied down. You want to fish black rubber hose, double braid fabric braid hose, through your aluminum conduit and also your small blue line down to the center of the wheel. This goes through the conduit and ends right here roughly in the middle. You also want to cut your flexible BX cable to protect your hoses. On a DB66 planter we use 17-inch pieces here. Those can be slid over your hoses and attached up here at the top with a number 12 hose clamp. Here's a better view of where the air lines come from the inner wheel to the outer wheel and the outer wheel check valve. We rotated the elbow fitting on the check valve up and trailing in the natural direction of rotation. Short stub of 12mm airline to the T fitting, and that T fitting connects the inboard to the outboard. And then the same thing is done with the small airline, inboard to outboard, and then the check valve. Kit comes with a bracket to mount the rotary union on, unfinished. What you want to do on a DB66 planter is we measured 5 3/4 inches from this corner here and cut those legs off that long. The center fitting bracket back in there, there's a hole milled in it, and you go ahead once you get your 5 3/4 inches cut and weld that together on both ends of it. The line of thinking here on the length, the 5 3/4 inch length, which worked for this planter, and the amount of offset in the wheels, is it's when we're looking at the edge of the wheel, the hoses are just outboard of the straight line between the beads by at least a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, as much as an inch. We didn't want too much sticking out past here because of the mud going by if they get stuck. You want to go ahead and decide how you want to mount your bracket on the wheel in relationship to your check valve. We wanted to keep the airlines and the bracket fairly close to each other for protection in the mud. The bracket on the back here has 6 holes. The rotary union has 3, so you can choose any direction you want to mount that thing with 8mm countersunk Allen head bolts. Once you get your Allen head bolts tight, take a 15/16 wrench, take your lug nuts loose, mount your bracket on the rim, tighten it back up so your natural push connect fittings line up with your T fittings down here. You can go ahead then and connect with the 12mm blue and the 4mm blue between the rotary union and the T fittings. Then also tie down any loose spots with zip ties. On the outboard side of this rotary union is a quick coupler, both for the 4mm and the 12mm. Go ahead and connect that together. Get your black rubber hose roughly where you want it, and you can leave a slight amount of slack. There's crimp hose clamps here and screw type hose clamps. Either one will work. Slide your black hose on, tighten it down with a pair of side cutters or end nippers. The 4mm airline, fish it through till it's snug, because at this point your extra is down here, and cut it clear and insert it in there fully so it doesn't leak. Your right hand side is very similar. Everything's identical out on the wheel end. The inboard side though, here you only have a single connection for the 12mm airline and no connection for the 4mm airline at this point. Go ahead and pick out a barbed end fitting by push connect, and once you're done doing all your connections down at the wheel end and the rotary union, pull your extra hose back up this direction and connect the barbed end of the rubber hose with a crimp clamp or a screw clamp. Your 4mm airline needs pulled snug at that point, and the extra used up and cut off down at the rotary union. One other thing I forgot to mention, when you reinflate your wheels by hand, you need to check the threaded connection there for leaks with soapy water. Use an old Windex bottle or some spray bottle and dish soap and water. Here we powered up the PTG monitor. It'll show you to use correct tire pressures, but you need to go ahead and set your pressures. To do that, you're going to push and hold the set button up there. Select an axle. Select whether road or field position. Then use the plus and the minus buttons to raise or lower your air pressure setting. And this is your set point for your road or your field. When you're all done, you release the set button. That saves. Then you also want to do it for the opposite position. Whether you have just done the road position, you need to do the field position, or the other way around. And you all just remember, you need to push one of these center buttons, whichever axle you're getting ready to do. In most cases, a planter will be the trailer position. When you're all done with that and you've programmed in your pressures, go ahead and run your air compressor back on the planter, or connect that air compressor to your shop air source. Go ahead and select your axle, hit your road position. It will go ahead and read what the actual wheel pressure is, and then try to make it match. This may take up to 5 minutes. Then also go back and check all your connections, all your push connections everywhere, with soapy water and a spray bottle to check for leaks. When that's done, you can go ahead and lower your air pressure. Go ahead and hit your axle and then your field position, and whichever pressure you set in there. We set 38 pounds for field, 90 for the road. You always inflate a tire to the load that it carries, but go ahead and switch to field position and make sure that the end result is the system will say okay when it's all done. This may take several minutes. Once you've checked everything for leaks and everything works both in the field and road position, the correct pressures and the set points work correctly, you're all done. From what we've found, inexperienced people and trying to read paper instructions, we figured roughly about 20-24 hours, man hours, to install a system. Once we've learned on this a few times and got better at using fish tapes and pulling air lines and untangling air lines off the coils, we got it down to about 16 hours roughly to install a system.